This is the Nobel Podcast, where we talk about how to optimize your technology, life, and mind. We're joined by special operations veterans, entrepreneurs, investors, and others who have overcome difficulty to make it to the top of their craft by staying in the fight. Welcome to the Nobel Podcast. My name is Sam Alaimo, and I'm joined by Rob Huberty. And our guest today is John A. Dailey. Born in Loudoun County, Virginia, he enlisted in the Marines at 17 and had a pivotal role in the global war on terrorism and Marine Special Operations Command, MARSOC. John, welcome.
Thanks for having me on the podcast. I've been told that I have to make the disclaimer that my opinions do not reflect U.S. SOCOM or the Marine Raiders.
Let's start at the beginning to get warmed up. Where did you go to school as a kid?
So I grew up in a little town of Hillsborough, Virginia, that was very close to the Maryland-West Virginia border, kind of the tri-state region. The only thing it's known for is that it was the home of the Wright brothers' mother, who lived there for a brief time before she got away. But it was, out in the mountains of kind of the Appalachians, beautiful place to grow up. You could do a lot without getting in trouble, but, I managed to kind of find my way into trouble occasionally.
You enlisted at 17. That's far earlier than most people. What was like the earliest memory you had of wanting to join the Marine Corps?
No one else seems to remember it this way, but it was the 4th of July, 1976. It was the bicentennial of the country. So it was huge, celebrations. And at one of those in one of the neighboring towns, I remember a Marine coming through the crowd. And I remember him being like a Vietnam vet, old grizzled guy, chances are pretty good. He was probably an 18-year-old kid, just coming out of boot camp, The guys walking around in uniform weren't terribly common back then, but the thing that I remember most about it, which my dad denies to this day, my dad had been in the Navy and served on a subtender, and I remember asking, "Hey, who is that guy?" And he was like, "Hey, that's a Marine," and I recall there being like some reverence, in his voice when he said that, so that got me thinking, of course, I thought my dad was the greatest thing in the world. So, having him kind of talk about a Marine with reverence, led me to want to go to the library and start finding some books.
So the timing is actually interesting. 1976, the Vietnam War had just wrapped up. It wasn't common to see people in uniform, probably super uncomfortable. Did that have any sway in your mind as a kid, or was that completely irrelevant?
I don't think I was really tracking a lot of that. I was in 3rd or 4th grade at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't, I remember the war being on the news at night, as a little kid. I remember there kind of being in the background, but growing up where I did, there wasn't protest or, there wasn't a lot of certainly anti-troop sentiment, but I don't even recall any, anti-war sentiment.
What was like the media or the toys or the things that you played with? Like, were you torturing G.I. Joes at the time and breaking it apart and, cutting them with lasers? Was there movies or TV shows that inspired you at that young age that you think led you? Because I think all of us were inspired by that stuff and going into, kind of the GWOT, as a lot of people we've talked to so far, a little bit later. What was it like early in that time?
Yeah, absolutely. There was the old shows, there's like Rat Patrol, which is, the desert vehicle mounted patrols in East Africa. That was really cool. Hogan's Heroes, which was a comedy, but still, MASH, of course, was on. There wasn't a ton of TV shows, movie wise, or the John Wayne movies, Sands of Iwo Jima, all of those. But it really was, a little bit later when the Rambo came out, First Blood came out, and I forget the year, but at this point I was probably close to high school, if not in high school. And that was, started a wave of, Chuck Norris and Missing in Action and Uncommon Valor and just these, everybody was going to Vietnam to rescue POWs. All right. So that was what every movie was about. And I was, totally down with that. That really started me thinking, other than, hey, I want to join the Marine Corps, is like a thing. I started realizing that, hey, this is what Marines do or what special operations guys do. And in fact, when Rambo came out, it really led to me reading. And I was a big reader as a little kid, but when you get in high school, girls and camping and beer, all those things are a lot more important. But, picked up David Morrell's book, First Blood, that the movie was based on. And that really got me back into reading. And that really got me back into reading and started realizing that, hey, if I really want to do this, I need to start, preparing, so I kind of went into high school, just looking at, hey, what can I do to make myself or my chances of being successful? Because I was a little kid, I was not a big guy. I was generally like the smallest kid in class, still never kind of grew up to the height that I had hoped for. So stuck at like 5'7". But in starting high school, I was a $120, and I'm like, hey, if I'm going to be a Marine, I need to, start wrestling. I need to, get into weightlifting. I need to, start becoming competent in, field craft and things like that. So that really was a kickstart, when that era of movies started hitting the screens.
All right, let's jump in to the Marine Corps. So you enlisted 17. Did your parents have a say in that? Were they agreeable, disagreeable?
I think they had given up on trying to fight it. Like I said, I had started at a young age, and I wasn't, adamant that the whole time. There were other things. I wanted to play baseball professionally. I wanted to, it was a pipe dream. I wanted to, be a long haul truck driver. There were lots of things that I wanted to do, but I kind of always kept coming back to the Marine Corps. So by the time I hit the age where I could sign up with their permission, they had, kind of made their peace with the idea.
All right. Well, when did it become real to you? Was there a moment where you remember the buses rolling up and then drill instructors coming out? Like, what was your earliest memory of getting picked up for boot camp?
I remember my recruiter drove me to the MEPS processing station. All right. And there we had to stay overnight. So they put us in hotels. I think somebody must have been old enough, or they convinced somebody who was old enough to buy a couple cases of beer. So, the next morning when we took off, it was kind of a blur. But we got on an airplane for Beaufort, South Carolina, and they let us drink on the plane too. So I for about the first 24 hours of boot camp, I don't remember a lot. But when you show up, Parris Island is kind of iconic. The bus, picks you up, drives down this causeway onto an island, through the gate, and you drive through the dark for it seems like forever. And when you finally pull up in front of the receiving barracks where you start, the drill instructors come on and just and you can't tell what they're saying, just intelligible, yelling at you until you get off and you stand on yellow footprints, and it kind of goes from there. So that was definitely, when you have a guy in the Marine Corps uniform and drill instructor hat screaming at you, it becomes real. And I think even more so when you're a little tipsy.
The Marine boot camp is known to be the hardest boot camp. And I would say the Navy, I just learned to fold underwear. One thing about MEPS, basically MEPS is just a processing place where you're trying to make sure that you're qualified, you don't have flat feet, or you don't have bad things. I feel like there's an 80-year-old doctor who's smoking a cigarette that goes all the way to the end, who they make you duck walk. It was one of the weirdest experiences. I feel like this has always been the case. And I still have a memory of it. And basically they make you naked in a room with other people duck walking. You're like, what am I doing here? They just went, was it the same 80-year-old doctor who just,
they must just ship him around from place to place because he was there. And I think he had a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, and that was the first time I was ever violated anally by anything. That was a pretty traumatic experience. They turn your head and cough, and you're kind of standing there, naked with 40 of your closest friends that you'd never met. And the duck walking, naked across the cold floor is definitely kind of seared in my memory is one of the worst experiences ever. Like SEER school level of hazing, I think.
I'm pretty sure that those doctors just get paid to look at people's buttholes. That's the perhaps there's not anybody who's seen more assholes, just like spread your cheeks. No, that looks fine. I guess they're looking for hemorrhoids or something like that. This is weird. And then going through boot camp, do you have fond memories of that? Is it exciting talking about it right now? Or is it like, I never want to do that again?
Absolutely. I don't want to do it again now. I don't think, I ever wanted to do it again, but it wasn't bad memories. I think one of the things that helped me, I think very early on, I recognized that these drill instructors that are, E5s, E6s, maybe E7s, probably 30-year-old dudes, cannot possibly be this pissed all the time at everything that I'm doing. I totally bought into everything about it. But boot camp, I kind of recognize that it's a game, right? I mean, you got to play the game, and you'll be successful. Some guys would really, really, really get stressed when a drill instructor would get in their face and spits flying, and they're yelling at you, and I kind of would have to kind of stifle a laugh, because I'm like, this whole thing is a little preposterous, dude. You're yelling at me for my boot being laced the wrong way or whatever. And I think that helped me go through boot camp without some of the emotional scars that some people seem to have from it.
Do you think that your drill instructors are Vietnam vets?
No. So we have basically three drill instructors for each platoon. So I had my three guys. One of them may have been, he didn't talk to us about it. And there's not a whole lot of bearing of their souls to you when you're in. They do a little bit more now, from what I gather. Share some personal stories. Back then they didn't. But some of the more senior drill instructors that were in charge of like the company and things like that absolutely had. But at that point, this was 87 when I went in. They were still in the higher ranks. There were absolutely Vietnam vets running around, but I did not encounter a ton of them that I dared to talk to.
So 87, interesting. I think right around there, both Full Metal Jacket and Heartbreak Ridge came out within maybe 2 years of that. Maybe Full Metal Jacket came out right around then. Did you watch those? Do you, and if you watch them today, do they make you laugh, or is it too far off?
Now, Full Metal Jacket came out. I think it came out while I was in boot camp.
Right.
So when I left, I think I was in infantry school. When I saw that for the first time. And I believe that Heartbreak Ridge, it was a little later. I remember going home on leave and watching it with a buddy of mine. And there wasn't a whole lot, about Force Recon and anything that I had read or movies or anything that I'd seen. I only knew that it existed, though I wanted to be a Marine when Rambo came out. I was like, oh man, I need to go talk to the Army recruiter about the Green Berets, because that's awesome. I don't think that I knew about SEALs, but I remember going in and, by a absolute fluke, talking to the Marine recruiter. This was right when I joined high school, and he was a Force Recon Marine, and he started explaining, hey, we have Force Recon. It's a lot of similarities. And he took me into his office, and he had like pictures from sniper school, pictures free fall, and all of this stuff. And I was like, man, that's exactly what I want to do.
So for anybody who doesn't know, can you explain Force Recon? What were they built for? What are they known for?
Force Recon started tentatively at about the same time as, during World War II. So really the same time the SEALs were starting. There's the Scouts and Raiders. So there were teams of Marines and Navy frogmen that were, swimming ashore and finding mines and clearing beachheads and things like that. The Force Recon officially started shortly after, and their mission was to operate behind enemy lines, gathering information for commanders.
Okay, so that ties into the part we're going to get to post 9/11, but let's bridge the gap between 87 and 2001. You want to dig into your career there and how it progressed?
When I joined, they were, where do you prefer to be assigned? Which is one of the few times that the Marine Corps asks for your opinion on things. But I picked California just because I'd never been. And, I wound up flying out to California it was January 1st of 1988. So kind of started the year off there by a strange twist of fate. I got accidentally put into a sniper platoon right off the bat, which is not something that normally happens. It didn't win me a lot of friends because it was something that you kind of had to work your way, spend a couple of years in the grunts, work your way into. I got accidentally put into a weapons company as an infantryman, and the only place that they could put me without having to change my orders was the platoon where the snipers were. So I was kind of given the chance, like, hey, we're doing some training. You've got to prove yourself, over this next, couple of months, or we're gonna, we'll send you away. And like I said, the recruiter that I had was a sniper, and that's really what I, wanted to do. The book of Carlos Hathcock, One Shot, it was thought at the time when the book came out to be the most prolific sniper in Vietnam. That book hadn't come out yet, but there were like some articles about him that I read, and I was just fascinated with that, with, long range marksmanship and with, operating in really small teams. So I just busted my ass, and did well enough that they let me stay. And eventually, got to go to sniper school and operate as a sniper for a handful of years. And there's a lot of that certainly carried over and helped me out. It was in that world. I got to go to jump school, go to Army Ranger school. So when I got to try out for Force Recon, I had kind of a leg up on a lot of people.
How do you get into Force Recon?
So at the time, it was called the indoctrination, and it was a day long. You showed up, the Marine Corps physical fitness test, the swim test, and then it just started kind of whatever they felt like doing. So, obstacle courses back in the pool. There was a long unknown distance ruck that was pretty lengthy. You just go, and there'd be kind of people to point you. So through the hills in California, down to the beach. When we got to the beach, drop your ruck, get in the water, in and out of the surf zone, until they got tired of that. And I remember coming back, and at this point, there were very few of us left. I think maybe 20 guys showed up to try out, and there was, at this point, probably not 12 or so left.
This is
and then
one day?
Yeah.
Wow.
And they're like, hey, put your ruck back on, and we're going to do the same route in reverse, which had been about a 10 or 12 mile movement. So guys start dropping it, and we didn't go that far. We made it off the beach, and they're like, all right, get in the truck. And then they bring you back and kind of put you through a board, screening session. So there's some psychological testing. And the big thing I remember was, and it was kind of the question that was always asked. They're like, hey, you're leading a recon patrol. You wake up in the morning and there's a shepherd, that walks up on your position, which obviously that, kind of played out, with you guys, later. But that was always the scenario they throw at you. What do you do? Do you kill him? Do you abort the mission? Do you tie him up and hope that he gets out? They really look for more of your thought process, I think, than how you answered the question. And, at the end, I think there were 2 of us that made it out of that event. So that was it. That was the one day, and then they send you off for training.
So we talked in the beginning about why you wanted to be a Marine. You saw really a nice cut uniform, but you kept saying you want to go sniper, you want to go Force Recon. What was the why behind that? Was it war? Was it the test? Was it the brotherhood? Was it everything above?
I think largely all of the above. I don't know that I really understood it all at the time, but I was kind of always just drawn to operating in small teams, and then the more I got to see of that, the more I realized that every time you kind of step up a level, from a Marine infantryman to a Marine sniper, from Marine sniper to a Force Recon, that you're operating with a tighter knit group of professionals, and you're doing cool as shit. Right? That's definitely a part of it. So I think it was really all of the above. And then it wasn't until I really got to Force Recon and got to operating in a platoon and in a small teams that I realized, how special of a time that is.
Okay, so you got to Force Recon. Was it everything you thought it was going to be?
Absolutely. I was fortunate to spend 10 years at First Force Reconnaissance Company, which is rare. At the time, we didn't have a primary MOS like with you guys for a long time. You stayed in your MOS as a SEAL. You had to test, for your rate or whatever for promotion and things like that. And we were kind of in the same boat. So when we got to be an E6, the Marine Corps could decide that we were going to go back to the infantry. Right. So the ability to stay there was pretty valued. If you were not a kind of a long ball hitter, then the chances are good that you were going to go away. So I felt really honored that I got to spend 10 years of my life there. And I loved pretty much every minute of it. I mean, I can't think of a day that I woke up and not excited to go to work just to see the guys, see what was happening.
A long ball header. Maybe the nomenclature, I know exactly what you mean when you say that, but the ranking in the SEAL teams, like at one point they used to say pipe headers. I'm not sure that that's quite the same anymore, but the difference between a good dude, a good motherfucker, a nice guy is like an insult. Oh, he's a nice guy, but a long ball header, that's one I haven't heard before.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, I think it's pipe hitters, right in there. A hard motherfucker. I talk in the book. That was, kind of our recon seal of approval. If you called someone, he's a hard motherfucker. That meant that, you could always count on him. He wasn't going to let you down. He would up for anything.
That is a hard title to earn. It's just like, good motherfucker.
We're building up to 9/11, 2001, which is where Tough Rugged Bastards comes into play. We're going to get into Detachment 1 and how you were kind of picked to head that up as one of 4. But did your time in the 90s in Force Recon, I guess from the perspective of 9/11, did that prepare you for what was coming? Were you guys training right and training hard? Or was it kind of a shock when it happened?
In some ways, kind of a letdown. That's all we did. And Force Recon was unique in that when SOCOM stood up in 1987, the Marine Corps declined to participate. So we spent a lot of time when we would go on ship, we'd do the MU SOC workup, go through our hostage rescue training package and everything. As we were getting ready to deploy, we'd link up with the SEAL platoon and we'd, work together. But there was always the recognition that, hey, these guys work for SOCOM. And so they have more money, they have cooler stuff. And, if a mission comes down, they're going to get it. So there was a lot of like late night garage drinking, bitching and moaning about not being in SOCOM. But I think the other side of it is it kind of really forced us to work harder and make do with what we had. Pre 9/11, I had been given a platoon. So I was a platoon sergeant as a 7, a gunny in the Marine Corps, had a platoon of Force Recon Marines. We trained up, deployed. I was sitting in a pub in Darwin, Australia, when the television switched from soccer to Tower One. We knew, right then that, hey, it's game on. We're going to be involved in this. I was shocked at how well training had prepared us for kind of what was to come.
All right. Well, what was the first station? 9/11, sitting in a pub. Where did you guys go next?
So we had already made a commitment to go to East Timor. So we jumped back on the ship, bopped over to East Timor for like a day. I think they were ratifying their constitution. So the FIBRON commander, the head Navy dudes had to go be a part of this. And obviously there was concern about security. So we provided, along with the SEAL platoon who was with us, personal security for those guys and for some embassy folks. But we immediately got back on ship, we were in Pakistan by late October, and then in Afghanistan in November. The first stop was a big chunk of sand out in the middle of nowhere called Fob Rhino. That was the first fob in Afghanistan. The SF was up riding around, up in the mountains, but we were down south of Kandahar. And then the first missions that we received were reconnaissance being sent out, just trying to find, Taliban. So a lot of vehicle-mounted route reconnaissance. We had General Mattis, who had become Mad Dog. He wasn't Mad Dog yet, but he was a one-star general, and he was unexcited by the lack of contact that was being made. So he was like, hey, you guys need to find a way to make something happen. So I took my boys out and just set up on a roadway outside of Kandahar and wound up getting into what was, I guess, the first, certainly for the Marine Corps, I think, like I said, I think SF they were at least doing some, kinetic calling in airstrikes and things of that nature. But I think the first gun battle of the war was us on Highway 1.
How long after 9/11 until you were at Fob Rhino?
We got there in late November.
Oh, that was remarkably fast.
Yeah. Well, and that's the benefit of having, a Marine Expeditionary Unit on ships. All right. We were fully trained, prepared, equipped, ready to go. I mean, it's really as long as it took us to sail from Australia across to Pakistan. And that included, establishing Jacobabad as a forward staging base. And, we were responsible for assisting with those things. But back to that, it was December 7th was the night that we got into that fight. And we were tasked with interdicting traffic going between Kandahar to the west towards Lashkargah. So I had a 30-man platoon. We had done a route reconnaissance, and I sent half of them off to do some other work. So I had 2 of my teams of about, it's probably about 14 of us. And we had other, support with us. We had some light armored vehicles and a CAT platoon, the Combined Anti-Armor guys that had plenty of assets, but we were tasked with going up and setting up, initially described as an ambush along the road. The concern that I had, and the reason that we didn't launch an ambush was, if there was no way to tell if there were, who was going to be in the vehicles. And I was not interested in, shooting up a car full of school children or just people who are trying to flee the Taliban. So we decided that the best way that we could do it would be to treat it like a vehicle takedown, which is, a mission that we trained for a lot. To do that, you have to stop the vehicle, right? So the premise behind a vehicle takedown, that your high value target is in a vehicle. A lot of times we'd use an aerial sniper to, with the 50 cal, fire into the block and stop the vehicle. Once the vehicle stopped, you can approach it and shoot anybody that needs to be shot, grab anybody that needs to be grabbed. So in this case, not having an aerial sniper, we opted for concertina wire and ran concertina wire across the road. So we pulled back off and sat kind of watching the road. I was talking to the aircraft, and a group of 3 vehicles left Kandahar. The first was a dual cab pickup truck. The following 2 vehicles were like a very large. One was a bus, and one was like a 5-ton, military type of vehicle. So every so often, the 2 vehicles would pull off and let this pickup go forward and kind of scout the route, which seems pretty fishy, right? It seems a little suspicious. But, I was telling my guys, I'm like, hey, it could also be, that they're looking for Taliban checkpoints and they're trying to escape the Taliban. So ultimately, that vehicle approached us. We had put chem lights on the concertina wire, so they saw it, and when they recognized that there was a roadblock, they tried to run it. It's a pretty cool thing to watch, a vehicle hitting concertina wire. It snatches you up pretty quickly. The bed of the pickup was packed full of boxes and things, but there were 3 men sitting in the back facing us. So my vehicle had pulled up onto the roadway behind them. I jumped out and kind of started yelling at them to put their weapons down. There wasn't a whole lot of likelihood of that, but this is December 7th. It really, really cold. And I remember that the 2 guys on either side, younger guys, were bundled up in blankets, and they had their blankets kind of wrapped around their AKs. So they weren't able to, they weren't going to produce them very quickly. But the guy in the middle was an old timer, and you could tell that he wasn't his first rodeo. So his hands were just red as hell, but he had his AK out. And it was one of the experiences that I had read about, and but the first time I'd experienced it, how time distortion happens, when you're in a gun battle. It really turned to the point where everything was happening so slowly, and I felt that I was moving really, really fast. I'm like almost laughing at this guy as he's kind of trying to bring his AK to bear, and I shoot him. And by this time, my guys are coming out of the back of the vehicle, and it turns into a little shoot 'em up. Guys start piling out of like a clown car out of the pickup. Before long, that was over, but the vehicle burst into flames. Now I'm like yelling, hey, back up. Let's move back from this. And the bed of the vehicle is loaded with ammo and RPG rounds. So suddenly, RPG rounds start cooking off and they're spiraling through the air. So it was a pretty wild night. And then we were able to bring in air on those other 2 vehicles and take those out of action. So it was interesting in a lot of respects. Historically, because kind of certainly being the first Marine Corps gunfight of the war. But from my perspective as a leader, being able to, watch and see all of the guys do all the things that they've been taught to do. So I was really impressed with the way everybody operated. It solidified in me that, hey, all the training we've been doing for years and years is valuable.
Historically, what you're talking about was very significant for a lot of reasons. What was that emotion like?
There's one part of me that wishes I could have been in the States, to be a part of the aftermath, because I know there was a lot of patriotism, a lot of people. For us, there was very little information coming onto the ship. A lot of it was you get what they want you to get. At that time, there were very few personal computers. I think probably, I don't know that anybody had them, but there were a couple of computers that we could sit down and like peck out an email home. And I think they shut those down. They'd shut the phones down randomly just to, for OPSEC reasons. So, we never understood that, what was going on back home. The few chances I had to talk to my wife were just to make sure, hey, is everything okay? But for us, the transit over was it was busy. It was just so, there's so many things to try to accomplish. And so we didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it. And then once we got on the ground, things started moving pretty quickly. But the first time we came ashore, my platoon came in helos and landed in Ghazni, Pakistan, like we're on the coast. And we jumped off with, we've got AT-4 strapped on me, law rockets. An agency dude drives up in a little pickup, gets out and like, hey guys, how you doing? Like we're all like pulling security, like we're going to get hit by the hordes of Taliban. You don't know what to expect, right? You don't know what it's going to be like, but once it goes, then you're like, all right, man, we've got this. We've spent a lot of time preparing for it. And I was glad, I was relieved, but I was really impressed with the way even the more junior guys that I had performed, and they did the things that we repeatedly did in combat. And that was one of the lessons that was kind of always beat into us. Don't do it until you get it right. Do it until you can't get it wrong. And that absolutely paid off.
So you were an E7 when this kicked off. You were already well-versed, had a career. So the young guys, the 20-year-old, 21-year-old, they were as adept in that firefight as you were?
I think so. There were one guy that I had a little bit of concerns about, but everybody else did really well. Most of the guys in Force Recon are a little bit older, so they were all having like E4s, E5s. And I remember like joking before the vehicles pulled up, that I'd been in the Marine Corps now 14 years, and I'd been in a couple of places where they were shooting. I'd never really been in an exchange of gunfire. So I was telling the guys, I'm like, probably nothing will happen. I'm like a bullet repellent, but I missed the first Gulf War because I was assigned overseas. We were supposed to go into Somalia, and they got changed at the last minute. So I felt like I had missed kind of every opportunity that had existed up to that point. There was certainly a level of disbelief, that anything was going to happen and going through my head. But my assessment of all the younger guys I had with me was that they did exactly what they were trained to do and were supposed to do. By the time they got back from that deployment, they quickly turned into the old guys because they were the guys with combat experience.
So how do we get there from Detachment 1 and the founding of, I guess, MARSOC?
Unbeknownst to us, like by that point, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld saw the writing on the wall that the GWOT, which I don't even know if they were calling it that yet, but the GWOT was going to require more SOF, and SOF was going to kind of lead the way. NSW was told to you'd make more teams. SF was told to grow, and the Marine Corps was told that, hey, you guys this time you're going to participate. And the Marine Corps were reluctant to form the Raiders in World War II. The Marine Corps didn't want to do that. And they were directed, yeah, you're going to do this thing. The Marine Corps always had a reluctance to identify anybody as special or different. There were times when Force Recon was disbanded, post Vietnam. The Marine Corps views itself as an elite force. So when you're saying, oh, we're elite, but we have these other guys that are more elite, that's never been something that they like to do. So they said no in 1987. They tried to say no in 2001 and were ultimately told, you're going to do this. The Army was happy to not have a Marine component of special operations as well. They weren't chomping at the bit for us. And there's the joke that, how do you spell SOCOM, ARMY, right? They're like the big guy. Obviously, they have some say-so. And at that point, SOCOM had, I think, only been commanded by Army generals. This was before, I think, Admiral Olson was probably the first CO. But what they ultimately decided on is we'll create a small unit that'll do a 2-year proof of concept, and we will see, if Marines can do the job. So it took a little time. I went back, came home from that deployment, and was told, man, you've been Force Recon for 10 years now. You got to go somewhere. So I went just down the road to the Special Operations Training Group and took over their urban sniper course and urban reconnaissance course. And when I went there, my boss was this guy, Colonel Coates. He had been my boss at First Force, and ultimately he was the guy who was picked to lead Detachment 1. So the decision was initially that there'd be a 75-person detachment. We didn't know where we were going to deploy. We just knew that we were going to deploy, and we would work under U.S. SOCOM. Ultimately, I think we deployed with a little over 100 people total, but there was about 30 of us that were, Force Recon, about 30 that were Intel. It was huge for us, but a really heavy Intel presence of human intelligence, again, geospatial guys. And then, with 30, 40 of everybody else, of JTACs and communicators and admin guys, mechanics. But there was going to be 4 teams in the kind of Force Recon-ish platoon, or the assault platoon. He brought me into his office and was like, hey, you want to lead one of these teams? And that's kind of like being asked, hey, man, do you want to, pitch a World Series game? Do you want to join the Beatles or whatever? It was like obviously I do, man. Let's, where do I sign? And it was unique in that he was like, hey, you pick your guys, out of, anybody that and, Force Recon Marines, pick who you want. I was able to pick guys who were really good motherfuckers, long ball hitters, pipe hitters, all of those things. So it was, and all of them were, everybody across the board. We realized that, the Marine Corps didn't want to do this thing, but if we were going to do it, we weren't going to, screw it up either. So it was a huge honor. We had a year to work up before our deployment. About the first half of it, we anticipated that we were going to be going back to Afghanistan. And this was right as the ground war in Iraq was starting. So that's kind of what we were training for. We were long range reconnaissance. That was the expectation. And then about halfway through, we got told that we were going to deploy to Iraq, and we would basically operate as a task group underneath Team 1.
So that was 2004?
Yes.
So how did that deployment go? Because from what I read about you, that was kind of a pivotal moment here.
Yeah, absolutely. It went well. We arrived in Baghdad, and there had not been a SEAL team kind of in that immediate area. So we weren't turning over with anybody. So we were kind of left to our own devices to build, our own target folders and things like that. But we had, like I said, a pretty huge intel package. So those guys were able to get to work. Once you shake the tree hard enough, bad apples start falling out. So we just kind of started, riding that one to the next, and wound up doing a large percentage of the missions were just raids, grabbing knuckleheads. We were being evaluated this whole time. So we're being evaluated by the guys from Group 1. The SOCOM and the Marine Corps was sending people from the Center for Naval Analysis to observe us and see how we were operating. They wanted to see us in different environments, so we got tasked with various missions, from personal security details for the Iraqi government to sniper support in Najaf, which I led, to give us the opportunity to demonstrate operating with different partners and in different environments.
What was it like Iraq 2004 or early on in the process? Probably pretty kinetic. Can you describe what it felt like being outside there in the streets, outside the wire, lining up outside of a door, killer capture mission? Just describe what does it actually feel like to do in practice?
Yeah, it was much, much different than it became later on. We were going out in Humvees, taking the doors off, sitting in the doors with mounted 249s and the guys in the bed of the truck. There was no, we had some old flak jackets that we laid on the floor in case, but there was not the IED threat that, there was later on. It was a lot of command detonated stuff. And, we got around that by driving just really, really fast at night, blacked out. It was not uncommon for explosions to go off behind us. The guy was sleeping at the switch. The other thing was we did, most of our stuff, obviously, at night. We tried to air late, like 2 a.m. It's hard to stay awake, when nothing's going on at 2 a.m. So when, we'd come barreling up or creeping up, I think we did about 100 hits on 100 building, objectives. And only once did we kill a guy. In almost every other case, we caught him off guard, caught him sleeping, and we're able to, obviously you can't get intel out of a dead guy. So our technique then worked really well. Those, obviously the enemy gets smarter too. Those things didn't pan out. I mean, it was just super exciting. I thought it was, every mission that we went on, I was, knowing that you're with a crew of guys who were, at that level, you come to realize that most of combat is predictable. It's all about recognizing where you can be shot from, evaluating what's most likely, and pointing your gun at the most likely place. And then everybody else picking up on that and pointing their gun at the most likely place. When you're really good at it and practiced at it, and you're good enough where you can actually think through what's going on, then your chances of not only surviving, but doing what you need to do, shoot up dramatically.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you're talking about like the organism mentality almost. 100 combat missions, direct action. There was probably a point where you didn't have to say a word, and it was body language on night vision goggles, and you were able to basically function flawlessly at that point. Is that right?
Yeah, and that came to, like I said, a lot of training. Over time, you start to develop this unwritten SOPs that, everybody knows, if I glance at something, the guy behind me would pick up on it. And I would know that, and I wouldn't have to take my eye off the breach point or whatever the case was. It really became just an awesome thing to to be a part of. The more that you learn to operate cognitively, when your heart's beating hard, the better you become at it. So it's really just through repetition, you start to be able to see things that, kind of go through the OODA loop of, faster than the enemy. When you kind of achieve that, it's kind of like a flow state, that is, there's a lot written about that.
I think one thing that's interesting about it that people maybe don't necessarily understand, particularly in that environment, there's all different environments of war that I've not participated in. I've done what you're talking about a lot, the same kind of thing, but it's actually really fun. And the excitement of it and the knowing that there's penalties, particularly, if like what's going on right now in Ukraine, that seems less fun to me. Like that you're entrenched and like really a lot of people are dying. But particularly when you're going out on missions and you're bringing people back, you're achieving an objective. It's your choice to bring somebody back because you're doing it in a strategic way. And like, who deserves to die and doesn't? Are they doing a thing? Do we get them back? What's this going to do? Is this going to protect other people? That purpose, that mission, that excitement, that fun is something that goes away and people can't find it in other ways. There's almost nothing in the world that is ever going to get that element of purpose, excitement, fun, heart racing, calm, reading off each other that we want to pursue the rest of our lives. And you want to chase that forever. And you created an organization that chases that.
Yeah, while you're there, it's awesome. But one of it is a penalty of having a war that goes on for 20 years. I came back from that deployment, did another couple of years and retired. So I was on the tail end of the whole thing. But the young guys there and the young guys that started up MARSOC and, all the other organizations that kind of become addicted to it, right? You're just deployment after deployment after deployment, and there's price that be paid. And sometimes that's family, sometimes that's, mental health, whatever that is. Guys don't want to do it, but they don't want to, they got to do it. And coming back and trying to find something to fill that role it's quite obvious, right? There's a lot of people that can't, and a lot of people that are ending their lives because of it. We've just had a rash of, MARSOC lately, a couple guys in the last couple of months, the former retired guys that, which is a damn shame. And I think there's absolutely ways to find purpose, in civilian life.
We're doing our purpose right now. This is it. And so the whole idea is that the audience for this are kind of transitioning people and like, this is what we did. So we transition and we're dissatisfied with our lives. And we're like, I want to work with a team. We started our company Zero Eyes because of the exact same thing. It's really hard to show that purpose, and the whole military has a ration. You went through this such extreme thing that it is weird to like war and actually think that war is fun. And I think that it is akin to, training for a football game. You're on the high school team. You want it to be game day. And when game day looks like what you think game day is supposed to look like, you'll want to chase that the rest of your life. That dopamine hit of that your heart races. Most missions were boring, were predictable in the way that you said, but rarely did I ever get off a helicopter in the middle of the night and land and my heart wasn't racing. You're like, this is awesome. Even if nothing happened, that moment, you're like, this could be my last day. This could be my enemy's last day. Nothing could have happened, but that excitement would have picked up. And there's nowhere else in the world that does that. And when you get out, you miss all of those things.
And the better you are at it, the more likely you are going to be to make it through time after time. And so it's a little bit of Russian roulette that at some point, hey man, luck's good, got to run out, one of these days.
So how many years were you in before you retired?
I did 21 years and retired in 2008. So when we got back from that deployment in late 2004, 2005, even though the Marine Corps was still trying to push back, again, Rumsfeld was like, you guys are going to do this thing. I don't know when the decision was made, but in February of 2006, the Marine Special Operations Command formed. So we went from Det 1 with a colonel in charge to a 2-star in charge. Those of us who were in Det 1 didn't immediately get sucked into the MARSOC. Some of the guys were eligible to retire and did. Some went on to do different things. There were actually only a handful of us because Det 1 was based in California. The bulk of MARSOC was going to be based on the East Coast. There were guys who were like, I don't want to leave Cali. So I did. I picked up, moved with my family, and was basically put in charge of building what would become now the Raider Training Center, our school, which, I had some experience as an instructor. Pretty awesome to have the opportunity to, build something like that from scratch. So it was, picking guys to be CQB instructors and sniper instructors. I went until 21 years, and I was likely going to be promoted to E9, to the Master Gunnery Sergeant. And we're a very, very small community. So kind of seeing the tea leaves, I was going to get sent back, or I thought I was going to be sent back to California. And I had made the promise to my wife and kids when we moved out that we weren't going to move again. We moved out here, we bought a house. So I opted to retire. It also worked out because right as I was in the last couple of days before I retired, the MARSOC finally got the authorization to hire civilians in the role that I fill now, the training and education branch director. So I had to do an interview on my last day in uniform. And after my retirement ceremony, somebody came up to me and told me, yeah, you got the job. I was like, I would fucking hope so. But so I took 2 days off, went back to work, and not a whole lot of change other than I was at civvies and I was trying to grow a beard.
So that's your current job right now as well? Yeah, the disclaimer.
Yeah, it's changed a little bit over the years, but yeah, I've got now 16 years kind of doing this, which has been pretty amazing. I spent a lot of time like coaching and talking to guys, mentoring guys about transition, but I kind of not a good guy to talk because I really didn't, feel like I transitioned. It probably took another 5 years as a civilian before I realized that I was a civilian. It just didn't click in my head. I would, still show up and work, 10, 12-hour days if everybody else was. And I loved, there's the saying that if you love what you're doing, you don't work a day in your life. And I kind of felt that way. But after a certain point, I had to realize that, you know what, and you're paying me for 8-hour day. I'll give you everything I got for 8 hours, but I got other shit to do. There's obviously a stereotype of civilians that work for the government of being lazy and ineffectual, and I never want to kind of fall into that. But also at a certain point, it's got to become the Marines' job to make decisions, and can't be me trying to do that. And they're absolutely more than capable and competent to do that. So it's awesome to be in a role where you're kind of like a granddad in a way, sit back, offer advice, but you're not dealing with a lot of the problems of child raising.
If you look back after 21 years and a couple combat tours, what would you say the best part of your military service was? And then what was the absolute worst part?
In my time in Force Recon and Det 1 and MARSOC, I don't remember a day that I didn't wake up, itching to get to work and to see what was going on. So, I think overall I had a phenomenal experience, phenomenal leaders, phenomenal opportunities. Most every day was among the best for me. Worst day was in 1999, December 9th, I'd gotten up and was working with one of the platoons that was diving. I was serving as the dive supervisor. They were subsurface, and I get like a radio call that another one of our platoons who was preparing to deploy were doing a BBSS mission, a ship takedown. And they were coming in from the top down, and the SEALs were coming in from the bottom up, and the helo hit the netting running around the ship and flipped the helo into the drink. And 5 of our guys, 5 recon Marines and the crew chief didn't get out. That was the first time that I'd experienced a loss on that level of guys. MARSOC, we've had a couple other aviation accidents where we lost seven Raiders on 2 occasions, helo and a C-130. But that hit me really hard because you kind of, when you're at that age, you think you're invincible. And when it comes down that dudes that you respected immensely are just gone like that, based on, pilot error for a long time, that was the worst, for our organization, especially for a close-knit organization like that. That was like a heavy hit. And that was the first time I got the idea in my head that, hey, man, you're not invincible.
I think I saw that video actually, and it when it caught, it went down like with this force of inevitability down to the ocean.
Yeah.
There's no coming out of it.
A few guys got out there. And if you watch the video, there's a guy, Scott Archer, who was setting in the hellhole. He had the fast rope on his lap. I think he also had, for some reason, a torch. I don't know why he would be the first guy, but he had a big Broco acetylene torch on his back. He saw what was happening and he bailed out. So he just jumped and he made it. And there were quite a few other guys that got out. One of the things that came out of it was that the equipment that we were wearing was really, really heavy and not conducive, no cutaways. And, we didn't have spare air bottles, and there's just a long laundry list of bad choices. The good that came out of it was we were able to go and rebuild a better suite of gear. And I was able to be involved in that, which was kind of a cool thing. But leading to cutaway equipment, to better flotation, spare air bottles, and a lot lighter weight ballistic plates and things of that nature.
What is it like, the satisfaction that that you started at something that was originally recon, then it was MARSOC, and it still is that, but it's now the Raiders. It's now like a brand and an identity that is something that harkens back to a time. How do you feel about that, and what kind of pride do you have in that?
Immeasurable, right? It's and that's one of the reasons that I still love getting up and going to work every day. So I've had the opportunity, early on when Det 1 stood up, there were still quite a few World War II Raiders that were alive, very few left now, but they came out and were, adamant that, hey, we want you guys to be the the guys to carry our lineage. So when we deployed, we were task unit raider. Our emblem, the Det 1 emblem, had a raider emblem on it. It was great to understand, and learn more about their legacy. And then when MARSOC started, these old guys were fighting, writing letters and doing whatever they could. And finally, the commandant just gave in 2014, and he was like, "All right, you guys are the raiders." It had been an underground of guys wearing the World War II Raider patch on their uniforms, deployed. And if they got caught, they would get yelled at or whatever. But like, what are you going to do? Send me to combat. So it was really a great day, both for the World War II Raiders, who were just freaking, a whole bunch of long ball hitters, and equally so for the guys now that get to carry on their legacy. Always be something I look back on with a huge amount of pride.
I figure I know the answer, but I'm going to ask anyway. You're still connected. You still see the young guys getting after it. What would you say to someone who wants to become a Marine or just join the military in general?
You really need to figure out why you want to do it. Whatever your reason is, just understand and kind of own up to that. If you want to come in the military, do a couple of years, get the GI Bill and go to college, cool, man. Be a good Marine or sailor or soldier or an airman while you're in. If you want to come in and do something in the special operations realm, regardless of what service, you have to be very, very clear about the reasons you want to do it. And I talk to every guy that comes through, and it's like you're weighing all of the reasons that I want to be a Raider up against being cold and wet and tired and hungry, and one of those things is going to win out. Either turn in the rope or ring the bell, whatever the case may be. But we have far too many people do that, and I think it comes down to not really understanding what they're doing it for. Being real clear of why they want to step above everybody else. I figured out early on that I'm not the strongest or the tallest or fastest dude, but I can work harder than anybody, and that seems to have worked pretty well for me.
Yeah, I like it. You got a couple Substacks. One of them is Ruck the Fuck Up. You want to talk about your physical program, your workout program, and what it is about rucking that you dig?
Yeah, I think, rucking, one, it's just a very easy thing to do, right? Anybody can put weight on your back and go. And obviously that's scalable. It could be 5 pounds. It could be a library book, or, it could be a 50-pound ruck. For me, it lets me get out, get the hell out of the office, get outside. I try to get some miles in every day, and the big aspect is just mental toughness. I think one of the things that's their commonality certainly across special operations is, you go through assessment selection programs, training programs that are going to push you to your limit and beyond your limit. And when you reach the point where you're beyond your limit, the only thing that's going to keep you from throwing in the towel and quitting is having a well of grit, mental toughness, resiliency. And you got to dig that motherfucker every day by doing hard shit. And if you don't, it dries up, and it doesn't matter how old you get, it'll dry up on you, and next thing you know, you're scrolling through the TV channels.
Mental toughness is a perishable skill, no doubt.
Yeah.
Here's a question for you. You get to see the younger guys go through at this point, right? You have pretty good access to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So are you hopeful for the future?
I think, across the board, recruiting is a problem, right? I think there are fewer people that are able to join, fitness wise, certainly fewer people that want to join. I think a little side tangent, a lot of the reason that people don't want to join is because of, our generation, bad mouths starts time in the service, not us in particular, but, guys that wouldn't want their kids to join. When I see Marines, there are Marines who have been a Marine for 3 or 4 years, then went to our assessment selection program and been successful there, and then have come in. And I'm always impressed by them. If anything, I think, one of the things that across the service we've gotten a lot smarter about. It used to be commonplace that I would drink till 3 a.m, and then go sleep on the PT field so I could be woken up in time to go for a run or whatever. We are a lot smarter about how we train physically. They have greater access to dietitians and strength and conditioning coaches, physical therapists, cognitive performance specialists, and all of these things that are making them a lot better. If anything, I think there's a little bit of a reduction in the amount of mental toughness necessary. We encourage them to see somebody if they get hurt. Back in our day, I think you're encouraged to play hurt, and there's absolutely value in playing hurt or being able to play hurt. But there's also value in being, taking care of things so that you can operate over a career, and not have to chew Motrin for breakfast.
Compartmentalize absolutely everything. Maybe that's not great.
Yeah. Yeah. Not optimal, but there is some value in it, I think.
I guess the assessment that I just heard is we still have plenty of great people toeing the line, but maybe less so in total numbers.
I think in total number, I think everyone is experiencing that, across the soft components, across the military. Everybody coming in are much more, I think, smarter, probably, at least like more tech savvy and more capable of fight that's likely coming. As we could see it in Ukraine, things are changing, right? A whole lot of UAS, a whole lot of, unmanned and autonomous weapons. Things are changing, figuring out how that's going to change. The thing that will never change is there will be a requirement for hard men to do hard things.
Or brilliance in the basics. You had a great article about that. It's fundamental. We'll do a couple fun questions real quick. 1 to 3 books that have changed your life.
I grew up reading. I talked about David Morrell's First Blood. That really kind of was pivotal. I think from a youngest age, reading like Jack London and Robert Louis Stevenson, just books about adventure, like sparked this thing in my head that, man, I can't sit on the couch. I've got to get up and have adventures. Even though, of course, I would sit on the couch, reading books about it. But I think across mountaineering, and even though I don't do a lot of mountaineering, I read a lot of books about that and a lot of books about the sea. And other than being a Marine and being driven around by the Navy, I haven't spent a whole lot of time in the sea. But Explorers, just any of those books were pivotal in kind of shaping my mindset, I think.
What about movies? 1 to 2, 3 movies?
Those movies that I watched in the 80s, the Uncommon Valor, with Patrick Swayze, Heartbreak Ridge was, like when we watched it was a little silly, but again, that was a depiction of Force Recon Marines that there wasn't a lot of that. So, you're kind of eager for seeing them on TV or on the movie screen. Really, war movies, kind of definitely shaped the way that I looked at life and wanted to go about my life.
We're coming up on the end here. You've had like a really incredible career. You're still getting after it. But I read about your dog, Max, and I'm just trying to figure out the whole dashhound thing. How did that work out with the dashhound?
It's just, we had to have the vet come and take a look at him. He's 17 now. So
my God.
Yeah. I mean, the smaller the animal, the longer they live, right? So he's a mini Dachshund. He was bought from my daughter, and it wound up, she's since moved on. And he's a great little dog. He might scare some people off because he loves to bark. I'm surprised, we made it through this episode without him. Up until about 5 minutes before, he was downstairs just going at it. But he's mostly deaf, so he can't hear it. And he's largely blind now, but he still gets after it a little bit. So he's a good guy to have around.
It was funny seeing that after your long list of accomplishments, your dog, Max, the dashhound.
Yeah.
All right. How can people find you? Social media, Substack? Where can they get your book? All that good stuff.
Probably the easiest kind of one-stop shop is I have a website that's just jadailey.com. It's Dailey. On there, there's links to all the places, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, any place to buy the book. A little further down, there's links to the Substacks. The one is called Ruck the Fuck Up, like you mentioned. The other is called Walking Point. The Ruck the Fuck Up, there's just more kind of F-bombs, and it's a little more focused on physical fitness and mental toughness. Well, the other one's kind of more focused on taking things that I've learned over a pretty long career in the military and translating them into, ways to get after getting better at getting better. And then all the way down at the bottom, there's little buttons for Instagram and LinkedIn. And, I try to spend as little time on social media as possible, but particularly when you have a book coming out, it's a necessity. So more so on Instagram. I post some things on there, and LinkedIn. I think I've deleted Twitter. I don't understand it. I'm like a old guy.
All right. Well, really appreciate it, Rob. You got anything to add in?
No, thank you.
John, it was a pleasure. Really awesome, and appreciate your long career.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Pleasure. Thanks, everybody. That's it for this episode. If you want to check out more from the podcast, head to zeroeyes.com/nobel, where you can see show notes, read more about our guests, and suggest guests or topics of your own. Until next time, stay in the fight. Don't ring the bell.